When I first booked that so-called dream vacation, I honestly believed it would fix everything. I thought maybe, if we got away just the three of us, it would be like the old days again, before the arguments, before the silence, before the bills started piling up and love started feeling like a routine. I spent weeks planning it all. The flights, the ocean view suite, the excursions, even little surprises for Ethan, like the surf lessons he'd always talked about. I imagined him smiling again, laughing like when he was a kid, when he'd run into my arms after school and tell me everything. I missed that boy. I missed us. When we arrived, the place was stunning golden sand, turquoise water, everything glowing under the sunset. For a second, I actually felt hopeful. I thought maybe this was it. Maybe this was how healing started. Mark wrapped his arm around my shoulders, but it felt practiced, like a pose, and Ethan just looked down at his phone, barely noticing the waves crashing a few feet away. Later that night, as I unpacked our things, I glanced at them through the balcony window. Mark sipping a drink, Ethan scrolling endlessly. The silence between them felt too familiar, too heavy, and in that moment, I realized something that hurt more than I wanted to admit. I hadn't planned a family vacation. I'd planned one last attempt to save something that might already be gone. The next morning, sunlight poured through the curtains, filling the room with that warm, golden glow I used to love. I made coffee, hoping the smell would bring Ethan out to the balcony. It used to work when he was little. He'd follow the scent, sit beside me, and tell me stories about his dreams. But now, he just walked out with his phone in hand, eyes glued to the screen. I smiled and tried to start small. So, what do you want to do first today? Snorkeling, the dolphin tour. He shrugged, barely lifting his head. Dad already planned everything, he muttered, scrolling again. That one sentence stung more than I expected. Dad already planned everything. It shouldn't have hurt. Mark was his father after all, but the tone, the distance in Ethan's voice, it made me feel like an outsider in my own family. Mark walked out a minute later, sunglasses on, phone to his ear, talking about business stuff. He didn't even notice the tension, or maybe he did and just didn't care. I watched them both, my husband distracted, my son detached, and realized how much space had quietly grown between us. As Ethan posted a photo of the ocean with a perfect filter, I caught my reflection in the glass door. I looked like someone who was trying too hard to hold things together. I wanted to tell him to put the phone down, to just see what was in front of him, the sea, the sun, me, but I didn't. Instead, I just sat there, sipping my coffee that had already gone cold, pretending the view was enough to fill the silence between us. By the third day, the trip already felt like a performance we were all too tired to keep acting in. Every morning started with polite smiles and forced laughter. And every photo we took looked like something out of a perfect postcard, but behind the lens, everything was breaking. Mark had become more distant, always stepping aside to take calls that couldn't wait. He'd laugh into the phone, softer than he ever did with me. When I'd ask who it was, he'd wave it off, just work, don't worry. But I did. I always did. Ethan, meanwhile, had turned into our vacation photographer. He snapped pictures of us by the beach, the breakfast table, the waterfalls, but only the ones where we looked happy. Later, I'd see them on his social media. Best vacation ever. The caption read, with a string of hearts and palm tree. His friends commented, "Your family's so lucky." And goals. I'd stare at those words and feel something twist in my chest. They had no idea that every night, after the smiles faded and the lights went out, I lay awake listening to the hum of the ceiling fan and the quiet distance between us. One evening, at dinner, Mark raised a toast to family and 2 new memories. I clinked my glass against his, smiled for the camera. Ethan held up and swallowed the bitterness with the wine. The truth was, we weren't making memories. We were covering cracks with filters and captions. When Ethan posted that night's photo, I glanced at the screen over his shoulder. The 3 of us looked perfect, sun-kissed, laughing together. But in that moment, I realized something I hadn't wanted to face. The happier we looked online, the emptier we were in real life. That night, after another long day of pretending, I couldn't sleep. The ocean outside was calm, waves gently brushing against the shore, the kind of sound that should have soothed me, but my mind was loud. I rolled over, the glow of Mark's phone lighting up his face in the dark. He turned away quickly, whispering something I couldn't make out. I thought maybe I was imagining things, maybe I was just tired. But then I heard another voice, Ethan's, muffled, careful, from the balcony. My chest tightened. What were they doing awake at this hour? I slipped quietly out of bed and walked closer. Their voices drifted in through the slightly open door. She doesn't need to know, Mark whispered. My breath caught. Ethan didn't answer right away. Then, in a small voice, he said, "But it's not fair, Dad." "Life's not fair," Mark replied, firm but low. "We'll talk about it when we're home. Just keep quiet for now." My hands trembled as I backed away, heart pounding. I didn't know what it was, but the tone in his voice told me it wasn't something small. When I returned to bed, I lay perfectly still, pretending to be asleep when Mark came back inside. He slipped under the covers, smelling faintly of cologne and salt, and whispered, "You okay?" I didn't answer. I just stared at the ceiling, tears sliding silently into my pillow, because deep down, I knew that question wasn't about me. He wasn't worried. He was covering something. And as the moonlight hit the empty half of the bed between us, I realized it wasn't just space. It was truth I couldn't see yet, but would soon have to face. The next morning, I woke up before both of them. The sky was soft pink, the kind of peaceful dawn that used to make me feel hopeful. But that morning, it only made me feel hollow. I replayed those words over and over. She doesn't need to know. It echoed in my head like a storm I couldn't escape. At breakfast, I tried to act normal. Mark was scrolling through emails, pretending to be busy, while Ethan pushed his food around his plate. The silence between them was thick, uneasy. Finally, I asked, "So, what exactly don't I need to know?" Mark froze for a second, then looked up with that calm, practiced smile. "What are you talking about?" "I heard you two last night," I said softly. "On the balcony." Ethan's eyes widened, his fork clattering onto the plate. Mark leaned back in his chair, exhaled slowly, and shook his head. "You're imagining things again. You really need to relax, Emily. This trip was supposed to help you." That word imagining broke something in me. He'd used it before. Every time I caught him in a lie, every time I asked about missing money, late nights, or strange texts, it was always my fault. "You're imagining things." I smiled anyway, forcing myself to finish breakfast. I didn't want a scene, not there, not in front of my son. But as I looked at Ethan's face, guilt written all over it, I knew he was caught in whatever Mark was hiding. That day, we went on another family adventure. The pictures turned out beautiful, us smiling against waterfalls, arms around each other. But behind my sunglasses, my eyes were red. I wasn't a wife on vacation anymore. I was a woman collecting evidence of a life that was falling apart right in front of her. When we got back home, the silence followed us like luggage we couldn't unpack. Mark went straight back to work as if the trip never happened. Ethan buried himself in school and his phone, posting old photos from Hawaii with captions like, "Wish I was still there." I didn't comment, didn't like them, didn't say a word. I was too busy trying to push away the unease that had settled in my chest. A week later, the first envelope arrived, thick, white, and stamped with my name in bold. I almost tossed it aside, thinking it was another bill, but when I opened it, my breath caught. Credit card statements, pages of them. Every charge from the trip stared back at me. The flights, the luxury resort, the tours, the private dinners I didn't remember agreeing to. Then, I saw the total. $70,482. My hands went cold. My name was on every page. I called the bank, thinking it was a mistake. But no, every transaction was authorized under my account. Mark had used my card, my credit, my trust. When he came home that evening, I was waiting in the living room, the papers spread out on the table. "You care to explain this?" I asked quietly. He didn't even flinch. He just sighed, poured himself a drink, and said, "We'll sort it out. Don't make a scene. Don't make a scene." My voice cracked. "You spent everything we had, Mark. $70,000 on what?" He didn't answer. He just took a slow sip and walked away, leaving me there, surrounded by the proof of how deeply he'd betrayed me. That night, I sat on the floor beside the table, staring at those numbers. My stomach ached, my chest felt tight, and yet, beneath the shock, something else began to grow. A quiet, trembling clarity. This wasn't just about money. This was about the truth finally showing its face. He left a week later. No fight, no apology, not even a goodbye worth remembering. Just a short note on the kitchen counter that said, "I need space. Don't call." That was it. 20 years of marriage, gone, like the sound of a door closing. The first few days after he left, I walked around the house like a ghost. Every corner carried his absence, his jacket still hanging by the door, his mug on the counter, his cologne faint in the hallway. It was unbearable. I thought about calling him, about begging him to explain, to come home, to tell me it was all a misunderstanding, but I didn't. Something inside me had finally gone quiet, not numb, not broken, just still. Then the collectors started calling, one by one. Their voices filled my voicemail. Ma'am, we're following up on your outstanding balance. Every time I heard the number 70,000, it felt like another wave crashing over me, pulling me deeper under. Ethan avoided me at first. He didn't know what to say. I didn't blame him. He'd lost his father. And in a way, so had I. But mine was by choice. I could see the confusion in his eyes, the guilt he carried even though none of it was his fault. One evening, I sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by bills and memories. The sunset painted the room orange, the same way it had in Hawaii. Only now, it felt different, raw, honest. No filters, no pretending. I picked up a pen and started making a list of what I could sell. The house, the jewelry, the things that used to define me. It hurt, yes, but for the first time in years, the pain wasn't from losing him, it was from realizing I was about to start living without him. The day I sold the house, it rained. Not a soft drizzle, the kind of heavy, cleansing rain that seemed to wash everything away. I stood under the porch one last time, staring at the garden I'd planted with Ethan when he was little. The roses were still there, though some had wilted. I ran my fingers over a petal and whispered, "It's time." I watched the movers carry boxes out, furniture, framed photos, little pieces of a life that once felt stable. Every sound echoed through the empty rooms, and each echo felt like a goodbye. When they took the last box, I turned off the lights and closed the door behind me. I didn't cry. I thought I would, but instead, I just felt free. The cottage I moved into was small, one bedroom, one window overlooking the sea. The first night, I slept on a mattress on the floor, listening to the waves. There was no marble kitchen, no soft carpets, no grand view, but for the first time in years, I felt safe. The silence didn't scare me anymore. It felt honest. Each morning became a ritual. I'd brew a cup of coffee, wrap myself in a blanket, and step outside to watch the sunrise. The ocean breeze touched my face, and I'd breathe in deeply, letting it fill the spaces that used to ache. I started painting again, something I hadn't done since before Ethan was born. The colors didn't have to be perfect, they just had to be mine. Sometimes, I'd catch myself thinking about the $70,000, how much I'd lost, but then, I'd look around at my quiet little home, the waves rolling endlessly beyond the cliffs, and realize something simple and true. Losing all that money wasn't the end of me. It was the price of finding peace. Months passed, and the quiet became my companion. I didn't expect to see Ethan again so soon, but one gray afternoon, I heard a car pull up outside the cottage. When I opened the door, he was standing there, taller, thinner, his eyes softer than I remembered. For a moment, neither of us said a word. Then he gave a small, nervous smile and whispered, "Hi, Mom." I hadn't realized how much I missed that word until then. I wanted to rush to him, to hold him, but something in his face told me he carried a weight he wasn't sure how to drop. I stepped aside and said, "Come in." He looked around my little home, the mismatched furniture, the half-finished paintings, the window overlooking the sea. "It's different," he said quietly. "It's peaceful," I replied. We sat at the table, the same way we used to when he was a kid. For a while, he just stared at his hands. Then, almost in a whisper, he said, "I didn't know what Dad did until it was too late. He told me not to worry, that it was all part of his plan. I thought he just wanted to surprise you. I didn't know he was using your money." I felt the sting of old wounds, but I could also hear the guilt in his voice, the kind that eats at you slowly. I reached across the table, placed my hand over his, and said, "You don't have to carry his mistakes, Ethan. You were just trying to believe in something that wasn't real anymore." His eyes filled with tears, and before I could say another word, he stood and wrapped his arms around me. It wasn't the hug of a boy, it was the hug of someone who finally understood. I held him tight, not forgiving everything, but letting go of enough. When he finally pulled away, I saw a flicker of peace in his face, like he'd been waiting for that moment as much as I had. And for the first time in a long time, the silence between us wasn't heavy, it was healing. Now, when people ask me how I'm doing, I don't give the polite answer anymore. I tell them the truth that I lost everything I thought defined me, and somehow, I'm still standing. I wake up to the sound of the sea, I paint when the mood strikes, and I take long walks barefoot along the shore. Sometimes, I even laugh for no reason at all. It's not a perfect life, but it's mine. There are moments, of course, when the memories creep in. The laughter that wasn't real. the love that faded, the lies that burned through everything we built. But I've stopped hating those memories. They remind me of who I was, and how far I've come since the woman who used to cry quietly in the dark, pretending everything was fine. One evening, I watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in orange and gold. Ethan was sitting beside me, skipping stones into the waves. He looked at me and said, "You seem happier, Mom." I smiled. "I am," I said softly, "because I finally stopped trying to fix things that weren't meant to last." He nodded, and for the first time in years, the silence between us felt full of understanding, of peace, of love that no longer needed proving. As the last bit of light faded, I whispered to myself, I lost $70,000. I lost a marriage. But I found myself. The words didn't sound bitter, they sounded free. Because the truth was simple. Sometimes, you have to lose what you thought was everything to realize you already had what mattered most. Your own strength, your own life waiting to begin.